During the campaign of now President Joe Biden, many people on the left and the right questioned whether or not Joe Biden would run for a second term if he ended up winning a first term. The dude was like 77 years old, which means he'd be about 81 when running for re-election. That would mean he'd be the oldest president to ever get elected and then again be the oldest president to ever get re-elected. I know it's not really that complicated because he ages and he's running, but many conservatives wondered if he would even make it the first term to the end. And then beyond that, many people questioned if they were just going to use the 25th Amendment to get Joe Biden out and put Kamala Harris in. Recently, Matt Gaetz appeared on Fox News and he asked this question. He's wondering if a transition from Biden to Harris is already underway. Now, immediately you'll hear many people on the left saying that's just Matt Gaetz. He's a right-winger. That's a right-wing talking point. But we do have many stories from mainstream publications that have created this perception. The Washington Post saying that Kamala Harris is taking an outsized role in the Biden administration. The New York Post reporting that Kamala Harris is answering phone calls or speaking with world leaders on behalf of Joe Biden. And more importantly, Joe Biden has not yet given a press conference. He has not held an address to the joint sessions of Congress, a State of the Union address. You'd have to go back to Jimmy Carter to find a president who waited this long to give an address to a joint session of Congress. Now, none of this is definitive. Joe Biden may just be giving Kamala more work because Joe Biden is an old man. It doesn't necessarily mean he is transitioning already, but the question is being raised. So I thought, let's take a look at what Matt Gaetz is saying and take a look at these stories that are coming out talking about whether or not Joe Biden is already giving up. I think there is a fair point to be made because when Nancy Pelosi introduced this idea of a 25th Amendment panel that would determine the mental abilities of a president and then decide whether or not they should remove the president, of course, you'd still need the vice president, she said it was not about Donald Trump. Many people thought she was simply trying to remove Donald Trump as a last-ditch effort just before an election. Some people thought the idea was if Trump wins re-election, she will then use this new panel. But many people speculated, this is for Joe Biden. They didn't want Joe Biden to win. They wanted Kamala Harris to win. But as you may remember, Tulsi Gabbard dropped that nuke during the debates, which sank Kamala Harris. Their next plan, I guess, Joe Biden with VP Harris. And then Biden steps down. And then here's my favorite conspiracy. Kamala Harris becomes president and then chooses Hillary Clinton as her vice president. And then Kamala resigns. I'm kidding. I really doubt that's going to happen. And to be completely fair, I'm not entirely convinced Joe Biden is giving up power to Kamala Harris right now because he does not need to. He can simply give her the authority without doing an official transition. And that may be the actual circumstance we're facing. Maybe it's not a literal transition. It's not on paper. It's an informal one. Well, let's see exactly what Matt Gaetz is thinking. Before we do, however, actually, before we do, go to timcast.com, sign up and become a member. We have a bunch of exclusive content. I don't have the website pulled up right now. That's why I'm just reading it to you. But go to timcast.com, sign up, become a member, help support my work. Let's just read the news. Town Hall reports Matt Gaetz wonders if a transition from Biden to Harris is already underway from Town Hall. They say on Fox News' Sunday Morning Futures, host Maria Bartiromo and Florida GOP rep Matt Gaetz made some keen observations about the Biden administration that has some people questioning who's really in charge over at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Bartiromo asked the Florida Republican whether a transition may be already underway given President Biden's avoidance of the press while Vice President Kamala Harris meets with international leaders such as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and French President Emmanuel Macron. What is going on, Bartiromo asked. Are we getting ready for some kind of transition? Quote, you have to wonder whether or not the transition to Harris has already begun, says Matt Gaetz. Joe Biden's had more nap time than he's had questions from reporters. And you're right. While the Middle Kingdom grows more ambitious in their goals, we are still toiling away in the Middle East. Joe Biden has had more attacks on Syria than he's had press conferences. Now, that's a really interesting point brought up by Matt Gaetz because it's true. Joe Biden hasn't had any press conferences, and he did have a military strike on Syria. But it's actually quite simple. Joe Biden doesn't have to do anything to engage in a military strike on Syria. he need only sit in a room and then someone says, here's what we're going to do. And he goes, sure, I guess. There's no work involved. It's literally 10 seconds of you got it. As opposed to a press conference, which could be, a half an hour to an hour of long conversation and questions. That's a lot of work for Joe Biden, who's a very old man. They say Gaetz also questioned whether progressive voters are having buyer's remorse when it comes to the new president. Quote, is this what you wanted? A warmonger president like Joe Biden, when Donald Trump did so much to bring peace to the world and to actually confront the real threat? China, not to be trying to build democracies out of blood and sand and Arab militias in some desert far away, asked Gaetz. Well, listen, Donald Trump is no saint when it comes to the Middle East. There are no new wars, but he did ramp up drone strikes. He did change the reporting mechanism, so we don't know exactly how many drone strikes there are. But I think the no new wars thing was good. I think the Abraham Accords were good. 4 historic peace agreements. Well, I think it's 3, but there's a 4th one. He also tried to withdraw our troops from Syria and Afghanistan, one thing that many, many Americans agree on, except for the establishment. They seem to be very much invested in us going to war and blowing things up. So, of course, they didn't like Donald Trump. Well, I should say whether or not they'll actually criticize Joe Biden remains to be seen, but progressives absolutely are. Now, I see a lot of conservatives ragging on progressives saying, haha, you voted for this. But you need to understand, they still hate Donald Trump more than they hate Joe Biden. They've always hated Joe Biden. We know they hate Joe Biden. I think it's silly to act like leftist populists who wanted Bernie Sanders want Joe Biden to be doing any of this. They voted for him because they hated Trump. If Donald Trump was president, they would still not be happy. So this idea that they have buyer's remorse is just wrong. They would happily vote for Biden again, knowing exactly what he is, and therein lies the problem. I take a look at what Donald Trump did and I say, oh yeah, a lot of bad stuff. A lot of bad stuff I don't like. But I will take the bull in the china shop over the mobster who's, illegally dealing in the china shop. Joe Biden is part of the establishment. They are corrupt and they are crooked. Donald Trump, in many ways, as I've said this before, I believe has done crooked things. He's like the typical American capitalist kind of unethical businessman, in my opinion. But he did some things that I did like and did agree with. But more importantly, he was just an outsider. My whole attitude was don't let the establishment back in the house to lock the doors. Let Trump run around for a few more years and then get a real, moderate populist or whatever you'd want to vote for in office. Instead, we get Biden Inc. enriching his family and what? Transferring power to Kamala because he's not really running anyway? The whole thing seems like some kind of facade. You may have seen this viral video recently where Joe Biden was speaking to House members, Democratic House members, and he said, I'll take questions now. And then the camera feed shuts off. The response we got from journalists was, oh, listen, you need to understand. He was taking questions off camera. He wasn't live streaming them. And I'm like, why? Why won't the man answer questions publicly? He's done some, let's be real. I'm not trying to act like it's the end of the world. He answered one question about COVID saying no return to normal for a year. But why is it that when it comes to a press conference and people asking questions, he turns the camera off? Is it because he doesn't have the answers? Is it because he doesn't have the mental acuity at this point in his life to accurately respond to these questions and concerns? Perhaps. They're going to say, Biden is the first president in 40 years not to hold a press conference at this point in his administration. I believe it's actually 43. Biden is set to deliver his first address before a joint session of Congress near the end of March. And it's been reported that Biden is expected to hold a full press conference in the coming weeks, but we'll believe it when we see it. Hey, look. It's not unprecedented. Jimmy Carter didn't have his first address to a joint session of Congress until April 18th or 20th, depending on. I have the Carter Library said it was the 20th, but then other news reports said the 18th. And so look, Joe Biden will do that, presumably, assuming he's still president. I know. A lot of people probably don't want to entertain the idea. They don't want to believe it. And I'm sure there are many people on the left who are saying, what a stupid segment for Tim to even question. Joe Biden is the president. Yes, I know. Joe Biden is the president. Donald Trump is not the president. There's no secret ceremony. There's no new republic. There's no grand conspiracy. Joe Biden is the president. Kamala Harris is the vice president. How long will Biden last? And aside from that, is Joe Biden giving Kamala Harris an oversized role, which effectively signals he already transitioned much of that power? Here's a story from the Washington Post. Check this out. The Daily 202, just from yesterday. I'm sorry, this is from earlier today. Kamala Harris is playing an unusually large role in shaping Biden's foreign policy. Actually, it's from last night. I was wrong again. Hey, how about that? They say just 6 weeks since taking office, Vice President Harris is playing an integral role in President Biden's foreign policy, putting her personal stamp on behind-the-scenes debates and on the world stage as she works to advance Biden's diplomatic agenda. I love it. What, bombing Syria? Harris has spoken independently of Biden to at least 6 world leaders. The White House says an unusually large number for a new vice president. Joined his virtual White House summit with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and given remarks at the State Department. They say she was also a vocal participant in deliberations over how to respond to Iran-backed militia attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq, as well as whether to sanction Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, White House aides said. She was part of a small group that met twice with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley and talked through the options, said senior White House official. She really pressed on the question of how to try to achieve some measure of deterrence while managing escalation. Harris, quote, was there in the Situation Room for the final decision, and she crystallized the case for taking action, said the official, speaking anonymously to describe private national security discussions. It's too early to say whether the president will formally entrust Harris with a specific national security portfolio, the way Obama handed Biden Iraq, Ukraine, and relations with Turkey after a 2016 coup attempt there. But keep in mind, that was way later in Obama's presidency. They say, but the skills, knowledge, and relationships she is building as vice president could serve her well if Biden, at 78, the oldest person ever to take the oath, bows out after one term, leaving the former California senator his designated heir. And there it is, my friends. The Washington Post is saying it to our faces. So no, I'll tell you what's going to happen. People are going to hear Matt Gaetz say this, and they're going to say the right wing is making this up. But it's Washington Post. The Washington Post is saying this. Joe Biden at 78 may bow out after one term. What about before that? Is it possible? I mean, it is possible that Joe Biden knows at any moment he's well past. Look, and I mean this with all due respect. Joe Biden is older than the average life expectancy for a male of his generation. He's 2 years past the average life expectancy. I believe it's actually responsible for him to be designating Kamala Harris in this way. The bigger issue is that we all knew it. We knew Joe Biden was not fit to be president. We should not be put in a position as a country where our president has to be giving up powers to the vice president because he knows, they know, and we all know he's just too old. Stop giving me this line about speech impediments. He's just an old man. I'm fine with it. I get it. People voted for him because they did not like Donald Trump. Great. Now we got a president who needs help. He's giving it to Kamala Harris. The problem? Who voted for Kamala? I still think Kamala could have won. And when you look at the numbers, because Joe Biden, nobody really liked him anyway. But I got to be honest. I think it's exactly this. Biden represented Obama-era nostalgia. Kamala Harris could have won, but I wouldn't personally bet on it. I mean, maybe coin toss. I don't know. Joe Biden, I did not expect to win for a variety of reasons, especially all throughout the last year, where I thought Trump would make bold moves, which would contribute to a massive landslide. It never happened. Trump didn't do the things I thought he was going to do. He just didn't do it. He did some things, don't get me wrong, but certainly not enough. I will say I probably misread the room. Donald Trump got more votes than any sitting president ever. But what I didn't anticipate would be all of the people who absolutely hated him, no matter what. I assumed a lot of people were just sick and tired of it and would just probably ignore what was going on. But I suppose with COVID, keep in mind, Donald Trump still got 74.2 million votes. Amazing. Amid an economic downturn, amid all of the obnoxious and stupid things Trump did, he still gained like 12 million more votes than last time. That's absolutely crazy. Now check it out. Washington Post says, when it comes to foreign policy, modern vice presidents can play a wide variety of roles. All of them advise the president they serve, but they can also go on specific missions, as Dick Cheney did with trips to Pakistan and Afghanistan in President George W. Bush's final 2 years. Or they can manage specific diplomatic relationships as Biden did when he became the point person for contacts with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan after the coup attempt against him. Though there are many people who question whether there was actually a coup attempt. Let me point something out to everybody. It might be a little too young. The older folks, you probably already know this. The trope during the Bush years was that Dick Cheney was actually the one in charge. In fact, on American Dad, oh, I know the left is just outraged at my pop culture references. American Dad by Seth MacFarlane was originally a show about a CIA dad who was very right-wing and patriotic and very, pro-Bush. Actually, I think this might have been Family Guy, one of the other shows. I think maybe American Dad. George W. Bush is in heaven, and or I can't remember exactly what the joke is, but he gets a phone call. Oh, I'm sorry, God gets a phone call, and it's from Dick Cheney. So basically, George W. Bush asks God what to do, and then God tells him, but then God's like, oh, my phone's ringing, gotta go. And then he's like, Mr. Cheney. The joke being that Dick Cheney was the actual president and George W. Bush was just the marketable face. Everybody remembers Bush Sr. There was leadership there. It was the Reagan years. Here comes George W. Bush, and Bush is a brand. And it worked. Barely, to be completely honest. Gore almost won, and then you had the Florida issue, and then the Supreme Court said, nah, and then it went to George W. Bush. But many people were acting as though Dick Cheney was the guy who was actually in charge. Am I going to be shocked now if Kamala Harris is the one who's actually in charge? No, not in the least bit. We knew it before he got elected. We know it now. And we know what happens in previous administrations. They say, how much or how little foreign policy falls to a vice president depends on the priorities of the person sitting behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office, as well as global circumstances frequently beyond their control. Senior White House aides emphasized. They say Harris is committed to Biden's priorities. I'll tell you what Biden's priorities are, in my opinion. Little work as possible, calling a lid, doing no press conferences. He'll do what he has to when he has to. But I tell you this, in my opinion, Joe Biden's probably sitting in a chair in the sun with a little blanket on his lap. And they're just like, Joe, we're going to do our thing. And he goes, go for it. Don't worry about it. Just keep me in the loop so that I can answer, Why doesn't Joe Biden answer questions? Because he probably isn't the one signing off on all these documents in terms of what's in them. So let me clarify. If someone hands Joe Biden a document and says, missile strike in Syria, he goes, you got it. Just keep me in the loop, whatever. Kamala Harris is the one who's making the decisions and talking about it. And Joe Biden's just like, you got it. Sure. What would happen if you took a person like that and had him and they held a press conference? You'd hear someone say, on page 4 of the document that got released, your executive order, you said this. He'd be like, I did. Is that? Oh, yeah. He wouldn't know because he didn't write it, but signed off on it probably. I'd imagine that when it comes to Obama and Bush and many other people, you'd actually, Obama, Bush, Clinton, etc. They are still looking at the documents, skimming through them. A lot of work. You can see how they age when they do it. Biden, I think no. I think no. They're going to say Kamala Harris keeps a busy schedule of regular meetings or meals with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Austin, and other foreign policy and national security officials. It seems very obvious that when you look at this, she's actually the one in charge. Is it a legit transition? No. The only reason I think we're calling it a transition is because Joe Biden is 78 and we're not confident he's going to last forever. Whereas with George W. Bush, he wasn't that old. So even though Cheney may have been the one dictating a lot of the policy, it is what it is, right? Well, we have this other article from ABC that says Kamala Harris slowly starts to carve out a role beyond making sure Joe Biden is a success. Look at this. Nothing about Kamala Harris is number 2, a longtime friend said. This is from a couple of weeks ago, February 17th. So where did Matt Gaetz get this idea? They're going to tell you a right-wing talking point, but the man did not make it up himself. This has been talked about for some time. The people around Kamala Harris is saying she is not number 2. So what does that mean? What is Biden actually doing? Well, I think it's fairly obvious that she is probably, in my opinion, preparing to take over in some capacity, but or literally has taken over. But I want to make sure I'm fair, and I want to point out a few things in favor of Joe Biden as to why we're not hearing from him more, and play devil's advocate a little bit. NBC News reports Biden address to Congress could be pushed back for COVID relief promotion. Details about when and how the major speech will be done are still being worked out. I got to say, I do find it very interesting that we've gone this far and we have not seen a speech from Joe Biden or even a press conference. Like I said, you got to go back to 1977, Jimmy Carter. I understand there's a lot of reasons. We can point them out. Okay, COVID relief. Fine. How about this one? Texas congressman confirms extremist threats against Congress for Biden's State of the Union address. We're going to have to open the Capitol back up, but as a former federal prosecutor, it has to be threat-based, said U.S. Rep. Michael McCall, a Republican from Texas. Could it be the reason they're not doing a joint session is that it would put the president, the vice president, and a joint session of Congress all in the same place? And I'd imagine Supreme Court justices would be there, and they're probably paranoid. I think they're paranoid over this, threat we hear, this Blue Anon stuff, right? You've got the mainstream media riling everybody up, claiming that militias are going to storm the Capitol, and I just don't think that's going to happen. I mean, look, I'm not right all the time. My predictions, I'm not a psychic. But, maybe there's a threat. I just don't see it as this big. Not to mention, when you have 5,000 National Guardsmen, do we really have to worry all that much? So maybe the real issue is this. They don't want to have the event because Joe Biden couldn't handle it. They'll have it eventually when they think he can. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll keep pushing it back, citing COVID or threats. Or maybe the COVID and the threats are just the excuse to stop the speech from happening. Like, I'm not saying one or the other. I know, don't put the words in my mouth. I'm just saying it could be one or the other. It could be that they're saying they're worried and they got to keep the guard there because it maintains this threat presence. And then as long as they do, Joe Biden can't do anything. Look, I wish Joe Biden well. I wish him health and security and safety. And we heard from, last year, NBC says, this is from 447 days ago, that he was healthy and vigorous for a 77-year-old. He is in good health and nowhere near slowing down. But I just really, really do not think that is the case. Sorry. I think it's more so the case that he may be healthy, right? But when you get older, the decline happens faster and faster. And it's sad. I know a lot of people, if you've seen your parents or grandparents go through the stuff, you know that it's very different when you're in your 20s into your 30s and you start feeling the age hit you. You turn 30 and you're like, I can't jump off buildings anymore like I used to when I was 17 skateboarding. Or maybe you play football or soccer and you realize like things, it's not as easy as it used to be. You start to feel it. But you start to feel it, it's still not that much. Maybe it's just me. But I've been skateboarding for like 22 years or whatever. And is it 22 years now? Like, wow, that's crazy. Maybe 21. A lot of people say that when you get 30, all of a sudden it's harder to do everything. I haven't really noticed that a little tiny bit, but not really. It's like I can still do everything I've always done, but I will admit I don't take the same risks that I used to. But as you start to get older, you start to notice. So forgive the skateboarding analogies, but it's my point of reference, my knowledge, right? Tony Hawk, famous skateboarder. You probably have heard of him. He did this famous video where he was 50 years old and he was going to do one of the hardest tricks in skateboarding, the 900, and it was very difficult for him. And he was like, it's the last one I'll ever do. Now I think he's like 53 or whatever, and he did a trick one step down, the last 720 he's ever done. In only a few years, he went from being able to do one of the hardest tricks in skateboarding to struggling to do a trick he's done since he was a teenager. As you get older, it happens faster and faster. So maybe a year ago, they said Joe Biden was healthy and fit. But it's been a year, and now he's 78. And as time goes on, he's just going to keep degrading. On October 29th, before the election, we have this from abc.net.au, Australian news. They said if Joe Biden wins the U.S. election, would he really serve only one term? Here's what that would mean for him and Kamala Harris. Then we have this one. I believe this one is a much more, this is around the same time. How long will Biden last in office? Maybe not so long. An opinion piece from New Jersey's 101.5. I think it's fair to say that we are looking at a president who doesn't have what it takes. We have this story from the Daily Caller. Biden will deliver first primetime national address to commemorate the anniversary of the pandemic. So I want to make sure I'm giving you as much context as possible. And this is them saying Biden's going to give the speech. I believe it would be unfair to ignore that there is COVID. Democrats tend to be very scared of it. And there were people storming the Capitol. So maybe that's a legitimate reason. The Daily Caller says White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki announced Monday morning that President Joe Biden will deliver his first primetime national address Thursday evening to commemorate 1 year of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. I got to stop. Is this an address to a joint session of Congress, an actual State of the Union? Or is he just going to be sitting at the Oval Office and read a prompter? Perhaps that's all it is. Psaki's announcement comes as Congress is preparing to send the American Rescue Plan to Biden's desk to be signed into law. The House is expected to vote for final passage of the $1.9 trillion stimulus package as soon as Tuesday. Quote, the president will deliver his first primetime address to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the COVID-19 shutdown on Thursday, Psaki told reporters gathered at Monday's White House press briefing. He will discuss the many sacrifices the American people have made over the last year and the grave loss communities and families across the country have suffered. She added that Biden will look forward to highlighting the role of Americans will play in beating the virus and moving the country toward getting back to normal. They said the Biden administration has weathered transparency questions in recent days. The president has yet to schedule a date with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to deliver his first joint session address to Congress and has waited longer than any president in nearly a century to hold his first solo press conference. Psaki reiterated at Monday's press briefing that Biden will host his first press conference by the end of March. Let me tell y'all something. I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like Kamala Harris. I don't. If they do good things, I will praise them for it. For the time being, I haven't seen it. Sorry, that's just the case. Donald Trump did some good things and he did some bad things. But the Democrats acted like whiny, petulant children, the politicians, and many of the voters, over what Trump was or wasn't doing. We got endless conspiracy, garbage, and nonsense, and I'm extremely critical of not giving the man an opportunity. Criticize him when he does something wrong. I'll say the same thing for Joe Biden. I want to see him do well. I want to see things that I like. Recently, it was announced that Joe Biden called off a military strike out of fear that it could result in civilian deaths. That is a good thing. However, you may have noticed I retweeted even Hassan the Son, a leftist, when he said, Americans are so used to war crimes, they consider it a good thing when one doesn't happen. That's a good point. Joe Biden should just not bomb Syria. So I'm not going to praise Joe Biden necessarily because he bombs Syria and then decides later maybe he won't do it again. I criticized Donald Trump when he fired 59 Tomahawk missiles into Syria, and I will praise them when they don't, when they engage in peace. So to the extent that Joe Biden said, I won't bomb, I'm saying thank you for doing the right thing, because if you don't give someone credit when they do the right thing, they're only incentivized to do the wrong thing. But I'll say it. I will. I see a lot of people ragging on Biden and Jen Psaki specifically, and I just don't care for this man. There's a meme going around where it's like, look how great Kayleigh McEnany's research binder was. It's very neat and organized. And I'm like, that's great. I thought Kayleigh McEnany did a great job. She was fantastic. Jen Psaki, I don't believe is as good as Kayleigh McEnany, but I'm not trying to insult the woman. I ultimately don't think it matters. Who cares what the White House press corps is saying to Jen Psaki? It's all smoke and mirrors anyway. You're not getting legitimate responses from these people. Now, I think what people really liked about Kayleigh McEnany, for instance, was that she would smack down the press when they pushed their fake narrative. Jen Psaki just says, I'll circle back. But for the most part, I don't think it's the biggest thing in the world. I think the bigger problem has always been the White House press corps. So let me say this to all of those people who liked Trump, critical of Biden. Be critical of Biden when he does bad and praise him when he does good, period. For everybody. And if you want to point out you think he does mostly bad, by all means, please do so. Please, please, please. But keep your criticisms in focus when it comes to like Jen Psaki on the White House press corps, who ask stupid garbage questions and tee up softballs to Jen Psaki when they're like, no, Joe Biden has got a dog recently and it's a rescue dog. That's a great question. Let's talk. That's a waste of our time. We need journalists who are going to ask legitimate, hard questions. And the problem is, when the people would ask questions of Kayleigh McEnany, they'd be garbage questions. Why won't Donald Trump denounce white supremacy? Okay, shut up. And now we're not getting legitimate questions. It's either we hate Donald Trump or we love Joe Biden. Can you just ask something legitimate? I know there are journalists who ask real questions, and Jen Psaki was put on the spot because apparently she was asking for the questions in advance. Yikes. Not that great of a job. But here's the point. Joe Biden may be handing over a ton of power to Kamala Harris. It may be similar to what we saw with Dick Cheney and George W. Bush. I was admittedly a bit young during those years, so I don't know too much about how that went down, but that was the general perception, at least among certain crowds. Maybe it wasn't true. But I'll tell you this. I don't like the nonsense. I don't like I hate Joe Biden for the sake of hating Joe Biden. When Joe Biden announces he wants critical race theory back, I say oppose this and criticize him. When Joe Biden says, I'm not actually going to give you the checks I told you I was going to give you, you criticize him. And it seems like you've got populist left and populist right now in agreement. Biden is not doing all that great. So how about this? Instead of trying to just drag Biden for the sake of dragging Biden, figure out what the populist left is saying that they don't like about Joe Biden. Find that common ground, because now, congratulations. It seems like most of the country probably would not like what he's doing. Strange, though, that the polls are saying he's got like a 68% approval rating on COVID and a 59% aggregate approval rating. I'm sorry, man. Even the people who voted for the guy aren't the biggest fans of him. So if you're going to convince me that Joe Biden is beloved by all, I'm going to have to ask you, where are the progressives at? They voted for the guy and they're still ragging on him. You combine that with Trump supporters. Sorry, I don't see 50%, but sure. Whatever you say, pollsters. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at youtube.com/TimCastIRL, the live show. So come hang out. We'll take your super chats and your questions and your comments, and we'll try and answer questions you may have pertaining to issues like these. So again, go to youtube.com/TimCastIRL at 8 p.m. We will see you all there, and thanks for hanging out.